The wind was not a howl. It was a scrape, a solid thing of grit and ice that seemed intent on scouring the very memory of grass from the Wyoming prairie. Will Madsen bent low over his horse's neck. His hat pulled down so far it crushed his ears. The world had vanished. It was not dark. It was just gone, erased by a pale brown fury that clawed at his skin and stole his breath. He was 38 years old, and in his time riding this high, lonely country, he had seen wind. He had seen blizzards that buried fences and droughts that cracked the earth down to the bone. But this was different. This was malice. He was headed for the Bad River Basin, a place most men avoided. It was where his cabin stood, a small punctuation mark of human hope against a sentence of geological indifference. He thought of his mare, Bess, turned out in the lean-to, and hoped the wind had not torn the roof from it. He was riding the line of a dry creek bed, the only landmark he could trust. The air was too thick to see, so he navigated by the fall of the land, the subtle dip that told him the arroyo was still under his horse's hooves. It was the horse that stopped, snorting, pulling back hard against the reins. "Easy, girl," Will murmured, the words stolen by the wind. "It is just wind." But it was not just wind. Through the shrieking dust, a shape loomed. It was angular, wrong, a broken geometry against the prairie's flat anger. Will slid from the saddle, his boots sinking into the soft drift of new-piled dirt. He kept one hand on his horse's bridle, calming her, and squinted. A wagon, or what was left of one. It was flipped onto its side, one wheel shattered, the canvas top ripped to useless ribbons that snapped and popped in the gale. It looked as if a giant hand had swatted it from the earth. It was half buried already, the wind claiming it, pulling it down into the dust. He felt the cold dread that came before pity. No one traveled this basin unless they were lost or desperate. Both usually ended the same way. He pulled his neckerchief up over his nose and moved closer. A low, "Hello?" tearing from his throat. There was no answer but the wind. He reached the wagon. It was a small thing, a farmer's rig, not meant for this kind of punishment. He saw a trunk, busted open, its contents, linens, a silver-backed brush, a small child's doll, scattered and already ruined, flapping in the dirt. He put his hand on the wreckage, about to turn away, assuming the occupants had been thrown clear or had run. Then he heard it, a sound so small it barely registered. A cough. He ripped at the canvas flap that covered the wagon's opening. It was stiff, pinned by the weight of drifted earth. He put his shoulder into it, grunting, and tore the canvas free. Inside was a tangle of shadow, blankets, and fear. 3 women. The first one he saw was holding the barrel of a long rifle, though the stock was splintered. She was pressed against the back of the wagon bed, her eyes wide, black, and filled with a sharp, protective fury. She might have been beautiful once, but now her face was a mask of chapped skin and suspicion. "Stay back," she hissed. "Ma'am," Will said, holding his hands up slowly. "I mean no harm. The storm." "Get back," she snapped. Her knuckles were white on the useless rifle. This was Lenora. 28 years of hard lines already drawn around her mouth. Behind her, another woman was curled into a ball. She was younger, perhaps 24, and she was not looking at him. She was staring at the wagon's floorboards, her hands pressed flat over her ears, her body rocking in a silent rhythm. She was clean, untouched by the dirt, as if she had walled herself off from the world. This was Clara. And then, from under a pile of damp blankets, a third set of eyes. A girl, barely 19, her face pale and heart-shaped. Her fear looked different. It was brittle, theatrical. When she saw Will, she did not look defiant or lost. She just looked undone. She let out a small, shuddering gasp. This was Josephine. "You have to come out," Will shouted over the wind. "This wagon will be buried in an hour. You will suffocate." Lenora's eyes darted from Will to the howling brown void outside. She knew he was right. The air inside the wagon was already thick with dust. "Where?" she demanded. "My cabin. "It is about a mile north. It is safe. It is shelter. We do not need— You will die here," Will said. It was not a threat. It was a fact. The land did not care about pride. He looked past her to the silent one. "Clara." "She is hurt?" Josephine answered, her voice thin. "Her foot. When we turned over, I think it is broken." Will nodded. He looked at Lenora. "I have one horse. We walk now, or we do not walk at all. I will help her." He did not wait for permission. He reached in, his movements slow, deliberate. He expected Lenora to fight him, but she just watched, her entire body tensed. Will moved toward Clara. The rocking woman did not look up, but she flinched when his shadow fell over her. "Ma'am, Clara," he said the name softly, though he did not know it. "I am Will. I am going to lift you. We are going to walk." She made no sound. He slid his arms under her, one beneath her knees, one behind her back. She was light, a bundle of wool and trembling. He lifted her, and for the first time, she looked at him. Her eyes were a pale, empty gray, and they looked straight through him, as if he were just another part of the storm she needed to endure. He carried her out into the wind. It hit them like a solid wall. Clara buried her face in his shoulder. A purely animal instinct. "Come on!" he yelled back at the wagon. Josephine scrambled out, falling to her knees in the dust. She looked at the devastation, her mouth open in a silent, "Oh!" Lenora emerged last, clutching the broken rifle. She looked at Will, who now held her sister, and her face was a conflict of humiliation and hatred. "This way," Will pointed. "Hold on to my coat, ma'am. Miss, hold on to her. Do not let go of each other." He led the horse with one hand, carried Clara in the other arm, and felt the small, desperate grip of Josephine on the back of his canvas coat. Behind her, Lenora held on to Josephine, a small, broken chain of humanity against the plain. The mile to the cabin was the longest mile of Will Madsen's life. The wind tried to pry them apart. Twice, Josephine slipped and fell, pulling Lenora down with her, both times. Will stopped, anchored the horse, and waited for them to regain their footing. He did not offer help. He knew Lenora would refuse it. Clara did not move in his arms. She just breathed, her face hidden against his chest. When the low shadow of the sod-roofed cabin finally rose from the gloom, Will felt his knees weaken. He kicked the door open. It was dark inside and cold, but it was still— the silence was deafening. He gently set Clara down on his own bunk, a simple cot built into the wall. "You are safe here." Josephine stumbled in and collapsed onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, her bravado shattered. Lenora remained standing in the doorway, the broken rifle still in her hand, framed against the raging brown storm. She looked at the small, one-room cabin, the rough-hewn table, the cold iron stove, the meager stacks of firewood. Will walked past her and pushed the door shut, dropping the heavy wooden bar into place. The sound of the wind was muffled, distant. "There is not much," Will said, his voice rough from the dust. "But it is dry." He struck a match and lit the lantern hanging from the ceiling beam. The small room glowed in yellow light. It smelled of wood smoke, old coffee, and solitude. For a long time, nobody spoke. Lenora finally dropped the useless rifle. It clattered on the floorboards. "We have no money to pay you." Will turned from the stove, where he was already laying kindling. "I did not ask for any—" "Why?" she snapped, her voice sharp. "Men do not do things for free in this country." Will looked at her. He saw the exhaustion under the anger. "The country, maybe, but the storm does not ask. It just takes— I am just making things level." He pointed to the bunk. "Your sister's foot." Lenora's suspicion did not fade, but it made room for weariness. She nodded, her shoulders slumping. Supplies were low. Will knew it before he even checked. A half sack of flour, some beans, a slab of salt pork, and coffee. Enough for one man for 2 weeks. For 4 people, it was a problem for tomorrow. Trust was lower. While Will worked on the fire, he watched them. Or rather, He felt them watching him. Lenora moved with a stiff, proprietary air. She inspected his few tin plates, his skillet. She found the water barrel and ladle, examined the water, and then, satisfied, she set about making herself useful. It was a claim. She was not a guest. She was an occupant. Josephine, having recovered her breath, had recovered her mask. She sat up, pushed her damp hair back from her face, and watched Will from under her lashes. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she managed a small, shaky smile when he looked her way. "You live out here all alone, Mr. Will," he said, not looking up from the fire. "Just Will, and yes, mostly. It must be dreadfully lonely," she murmured, pulling her dress straight. "It is quiet," Will corrected. Meanwhile, Clara had not moved from the bunk. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on Will. It was not the defiant stare of Lenora or the inviting glance of Josephine. It was the unblinking, patient watchfulness of a predator. She tracked his movements, his hands, his feet. She was, as he would later think, like a coyote at dusk, judging the distance, weighing the danger, waiting for the moment to either run or strike. He let them be for a moment. He went to his small chest, pulled out a clean rag, and poured water from the kettle he was heating. He knelt by the bunk. "Clara," he said. He did not call her ma'am. "Your foot." She flinched, pulling it back under her skirt. "She does not speak," Lenora said sharply from the stove. Will did not look at Lenora. He kept his eyes on Clara. "I know, but she can hear." He held out the warm, damp cloth. "It needs cleaning. The dust out here, it poisons a wound." He waited. Clara stared at his hand. It was a large hand, rough, the knuckles scarred, the nails trimmed short but stained with earth and grease. It was a hand that worked. After a full minute, slowly, she extended her leg. Her ankle was already swelling, a dark, angry purple. A long, shallow gash ran across the top of her foot, caked with dirt. Will said nothing. He worked with a quiet care that seemed foreign to his rough appearance. He cleaned the wound gently. He touched her as if she were a spooked filly. No sudden movements, just a steady, predictable pressure. He tore a strip from another clean rag, found a small tin of axle grease he used for the wagon, and reconsidered. Instead, he took the last of his whiskey, poured a little onto the cloth, and cleaned the wound properly. Clara hissed, her first sound, a sharp intake of breath, but she did not pull away. When he was done, he wrapped the foot tightly. He rose, emptied the basin, and said nothing of it. That night, they ate boiled beans and bacon. Lenora served it, dividing the meager portions. She gave Will the smallest. He accepted it without comment. "You are running," Will said finally. Not as a question. Lenora put her fork down. "We were traveling to Oregon. Our father, he passed. That is a long way from the trail." Will said, "This basin does not lead to Oregon." The silence stretched. Josephine looked at Lenora, her eyes pleading. Clara just ate, her gaze on her plate. "We had a ranch," Lenora said at last, her voice tight. "Inherited near Laramie? We arrived to find it sold." "Sold by who?" "A man, the agent who handled our father's affairs. He said there were debts." She shook her head, a sharp, angry motion. "There were no debts. Our father was a meticulous man. The agent, he sold it to himself, through a proxy, for pennies. It was theft, plain and simple." "So you went to the law?" Will said. "We tried." Lenora's voice was bitter. "The agent is the law. He is the judge in that town. He laughed at us. He said if we made trouble, he would have us arrested for vagrancy, or worse." "So you ran," Will finished. "We were not running," Lenora insisted. "We were leaving. We were trying to get to Cheyenne, to find a federal marshal. But his men, they found us on the road. They chased us." "They were not trying to talk. They shot at the wagon. That is when the wheel broke." Will rubbed his jaw. He knew the type of man she meant. He had seen them. Men who used the law to cover their appetites. "We were in that wagon for 2 days. Josephine whispered, her flirtatiousness gone, replaced by a young, raw fear. The storm, it was a blessing. It made them stop chasing us. But then, "You found us," Lenora finished. Will looked at the three of them. The protective sister, the silent sister, the frightened sister. "I am just a man with a cabin. Ma'am, I cannot fight a judge for you. I can offer you a place to rest. That is all." "We do not ask for more," Lenora said stiffly. But Will saw the lie. They needed much more. The next day, the storm had passed, leaving the world scoured and bright. The land was bleak, a vast, dry expanse of rock and sagebrush that offered no comfort. Will's cabin was an island in a sea of nothing. Neighbors were few. The nearest ranch a full day's ride, and they were not friendly. In this part of the country, isolation was survival, and scandal was feared more than death. Will knew this. A man unmarried, living under one small roof with 3 women, one of them young and pretty, one of them broken, one of them a fortress. It was a situation that polite society, even out here, would not tolerate. Scandal was a sickness that could get a man's property burned, or get him warned off, or worse. He spent the day checking his livestock and repairing the wind-damaged lean-to. He was aware of them. Josephine followed him. She happened to be in the barn when he was pitching hay. She trailed him as he checked the fence line near the cabin. She wore one of his oversized shirts over her dress, and she asked him questions about his horse, about the land, about him. "You are not afraid?" "Out here?" she asked, leaning against a post. "Afraid of what?" he asked, pulling the wire tight. "The quiet, the nothing, the men, like the ones who chased us." "I am not afraid of the quiet," Will said, "and I mind my own business. Men tend to leave you be if you do." She was not flirting, he realized. Not really. She was testing. She was a frightened animal looking for the strongest protector, trying to see if he was strong enough. Lenora, meanwhile, had claimed the cabin. She was cooking. She had found his meager stores and was stretching them with a severe, unforgiving skill. She made a thin stew. She baked a flat, dense bread. She scrubbed his table. She was trying to build a wall of domesticity around them, a fortification of normalcy. But she watched him. Every time he entered the cabin for water or a tool, her eyes were on him. She watched the stove, and she watched Will. Clara remained on the bunk. She had a small piece of softwood she had found in the wood box, and she was scraping at it with a small knife she had taken from the kitchen block. She carved, her eyes distant, her face serene. But when Will moved, her hands would stop, and her gaze would follow him until he settled. She was the sentinel. That night, the tension was a physical thing. The air was thick with their breathing. Will had given them the bunk and his own bedroll, and he had taken a spare blanket for himself by the door. It was the only proper thing to do, but propriety felt thin in a one-room cabin. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the cabin settle. He heard Josephine shift and turn. He heard Lenora's steady, light breathing. She was awake. He knew it. Hours passed. The fire in the stove burned down to embers, casting a dull red glow. He heard a sound, a soft footfall. He turned his head. Clara was standing by the hearth, bathed in the red light. She was just watching the embers. Will sat up slowly. "You should be sleeping." She did not startle. She turned her head to look at him. "Is your foot paining you?" She shook her head. He sat on the edge of his blanket, rubbing the sleep from his face. "This is a hard place." She nodded. She looked at her sisters, asleep, or pretending to be. Then she looked back at him. She raised her hands, her movements hesitant in the dim light. She pointed to her sisters. Then she pointed to herself. Then she pointed at Will. Then she shook her head. A sharp, definite motion. She balled her hand into a fist, then opened it, palm flat, a gesture for all gone, or nothing. "You do not trust me," Will translated, his voice low. Clara held his gaze. She did not confirm or deny. She just watched him. Then she signed again. She smiled, a wide, false smile, and then waved her hand in the air. as if dismissing Smoke. She meant, "Do not trust words. Do not trust charm." "I am not a charming man, ma'am," Will said quietly. She took one step toward him. He stayed still. She was close now, close enough for him to see the deep, old fear in her eyes. She looked at him for a long time, as if measuring his soul. Then Clara did something that shocked him. She reached out her small, pale hand, and briefly, so lightly he almost imagined it, she brushed her fingers against the back of his rough hand. It was not a plea. It was not a thank you. It was a question. Before he could react, she turned, silent as smoke, and slipped back into the bedroll beside Josephine. Will stared at the embers for another hour. The next morning, he woke before dawn. The cabin was cold and still. He pulled on his boots and coat quietly, not wanting to wake them, and stepped outside. The air was sharp, clear, and frigid. The sun was just a rumor of pale light in the east. He walked toward the lean-to to check on Bess. He stopped. In the thin layer of dust and frost covering the ground, there were tracks. They were not his. They were not from the sisters' panicked arrival. They were from a single horse. The tracks did not come to the cabin. They circled it. They moved in a wide, slow perimeter, perhaps 50 yards out. Someone had been here in the deep of the night. They had sat on their horse, in the dark, and they had watched his cabin. They had counted the shadows. They had seen the smoke from the stove. Will looked toward the horizon, his hand instinctively going to the pistol holstered on his belt. The wind had hidden the sisters' arrival. But the smoke from the chimney, the smoke from Lenora's cooking, had been a signal. They were not lost. They had been found. Will did not tell them about the tracks. He kicked dirt over the clearest of them, his jaw set, and told the sisters he was riding into town for supplies. "Town?" Lenora's voice was sharp. She stood in the cabin doorway, her arms crossed. "You think it is wise to leave us?" "I think it is less wise to starve," Will said, cinching the saddle on Bess. "Flour is gone. Beans are low." "Your sister," he nodded toward the cabin, where Clara sat, "needs laudanum for that foot, or it will fester." "I can go," Lenora said. "No, you cannot. They are looking for 3 women. They are not, yet, looking for me." He did not say that they were. He did not say they had already been. He mounted the horse. "Bar the door behind me. Do not open it for any man. Not even the marshal. Should he come, only me." Lenora's eyes narrowed. "You expect trouble?" "I expect nothing," Will said, his voice flat. "That is how I stay alive. Bar the door." He turned Bess and rode east, toward the collection of clapboard and false-fronted buildings they called Sweetwater Crossing. It was not a town, really. It was a scar, a place for men to spend their pay on whiskey, cards, and cheap comforts before returning to the emptiness of the prairie. The ride was tense. Every gust of wind sounded like a horseman. Every shadow in a ravine looked like an ambush. Will rode with his rifle across his lap. He felt exposed, his back a wide-open target. He was leaving 3 defenseless women at his cabin, a cabin that was no longer a secret. It was a fool's errand, or a trap. But the flour was, indeed, gone. Hunger was as patient an enemy as any man. He reached Sweetwater Crossing by mid-morning. It was quiet. A few horses were tied to the rail outside the saloon. A wagon was being loaded at the mercantile. Will tied Bess outside the mercantile, his eyes scanning every face. He saw no one he recognized, no one who paid him any special mind. He was just another cowboy in for supplies. He bought the flour, the beans, the salt pork. He bought coffee, a luxury, but he had a feeling they would all need to be awake. He went to the apothecary, which was just a dark corner of the mercantile, and bought a small brown bottle of laudanum and more bandages. His last stop was the saloon. He did not want to drink. He wanted to listen. The place smelled of stale beer, sawdust, and regret. A few men were at a table playing cards, a handful of others. Ranchers and hands stood at the bar. Will ordered a beer he did not want and stood at the far end of the bar, nursing it, listening. For 20 minutes. He heard nothing but cattle prices and complaints about the wind. He was about to leave when two men entered, their spurs ringing. They were not cowboys. They wore town coats and derby hats. They worked for someone. They ordered whiskey, and one of them spoke in a low, carrying voice. "Delver is not happy," the man said. "The bartender, a heavy man named Silas, just polished a glass. Judge Delver is rarely happy. It is bad for his business. He is less happy than usual." The man insisted. Seems those three sisters from the wagon wreck did not die in the storm after all. Will's hand tightened on his glass. He kept his back to them, watching their reflections in the murky mirror behind the bar. "That's so?" Silas said, his voice bored. "That is so. The judge had men out looking for the wreck, found it, but no bodies, and someone was seen riding from the basin this morning, heading here." Will did not move. The second man laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Delver wants them found. He said they are liabilities. Said he wants them silenced, permanently. That is a dark word," Silas murmured, moving down the bar. "It is a dark business," the first man said. "He wants them gone, and he is offering a bonus for the trouble." Will put 2 coins on the bar, leaving his beer untouched. He walked out of the saloon, his movements measured, unhurried. He untied Bess, loaded his supplies, and did not mount. He led the horse down the dusty street. He stopped in front of the one building that had 2 stories, the Land Office Hall of Justice. A single sign hung above the door, Giles Delver, ESQ, Judge. Will tied Bess to the rail. He checked the load on his pistol, seated it back in the holster, and went inside. The room was opulent, or what passed for it in Wyoming. A thick carpet, a large desk of dark, polished wood, and behind it, a man. Giles Delver was in his 50s, with a clean-shaven face, soft hands, and eyes as cold and gray as a winter river. He was reading a ledger. He did not look up when Will entered. "The court is not in session," Delver said. "I am not here for the court." Delver looked up. His eyes were intelligent. He registered Will's worn coat, his calloused hands, the gun on his hip. He placed him instantly. A drifter, a hired hand. Nobody. "What can I do for you, then?" Delver asked, leaning back in his chair. "My name is Will Madsen. I have a cabin in the Bad River Basin." Delver's expression did not change, but a flicker of interest lit his eyes. "A hard place to live. I trust you have filed your claim correctly?" "I am not here about a claim. I am here about the 3 sisters you are looking for." The pretense of civility vanished. Delver's face hardened. He steepled his soft fingers. "I do not know what you are talking about. You sent men to run them off the road. You sent a man to circle my cabin last night. You were just talking about silencing them over at the saloon. You are accusing me of what exactly?" "Mr. Madsen?" Delver's voice was smooth, laced with threat. "I am a judge. I would be careful with my words." "I am not careful with my words," Will said, his voice low and steady. "I am here to tell you to stop. They are under my protection." Delver laughed. It was a thin, dry sound, like paper tearing. "Your protection? You are one man, a hired hand, from the look of you. You are harboring fugitives, thieves. They are not thieves. Oh, but they are. The youngest one, Josephine, she was seen. She stole a considerable sum of money from this very desk on her way out. I have a warrant for her arrest, for all 3, as accomplices." Will felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had not known this. "And you," Delver continued, leaning forward, "are harboring them. That is a crime. Worse, you are one man with 3 women, one of them barely of age. The good people of this territory do not look kindly on that." He smiled. "You are harboring thieves and teases. Mr. Madsen, it is a bad combination. They are just women. They are orphans. They are complications," Delver corrected. "And I remove complications. I'm going to send men to your cabin. They will retrieve my property. The money, that is, and they will retrieve the thieves. If you are in the way, you will be retrieved as well. You come near that cabin, Delver, and I will meet you." Is that a threat? It is a fact, Will said. Same as the sun coming up. You stay away. Delver stared at him, his smile gone. You are making a fatal mistake, son. You are choosing the wrong side. These women are nothing. They are dust. I am the man who owns the land this town is built on. I am the law. You cannot win. I am not trying to win, Will said. I am telling you to stay away. He turned and walked out. He did not look back. He mounted Bess and rode out of town, not looking left or right. The weight of the confrontation settling on him. He had not just bought supplies. He had declared war. The cabin was silent when he returned. He gave the knock, 3 hard, 1 soft. The bar was lifted, and the door opened. Lenora stood there, her face pale, a heavy cast-iron skillet in her hand. She saw his face and lowered the skillet. What is it? Josephine and Clara were behind her, their eyes wide. Will entered, dropped the sacks on the table. He knows. He told them. He told them about the saloon, the talk of silencing them. He told them about the confrontation with Delver. He told them about the threat to retrieve them. The tension that had been a thin wire in the cabin now became a suffocating blanket. Josephine let out a small, strangled cry. We have to go. We have to run. Now! Run where? Lenora's voice was brittle. He will find us. We saw what his men do. We run, we die in a ditch. We stay, we die here, Josephine countered, her voice rising to a shriek. He will send them. He will send those men. Quiet, Lenora snapped. She turned to Will. You brought this on us. You confronted him? What right did you have? You made it worse. You painted a target on this cabin. The target was already there, Will said, his voice weary. The man who circled the cabin last night painted it. I just let the painter know I saw him. We have to leave, Josephine insisted, pulling at her hair. No, Lenora said. We cannot. Clara, who had been silent, suddenly slammed her hand flat on the table. The sound was like a gunshot. They all looked at her. She shook her head, a violent, sharp motion. No. She pointed to the floor. Here, stay here. She is right, Lenora said, her voice trembling. We cannot run again. She sank onto the bench, her head in her hands. It is my fault. It is all my fault. Lenora, do not, Josephine whispered. It is. Lenora looked up, her face ravaged by a guilt that was deeper than fear. I trusted him. Our father, he said. Mr. Delver is a good man. He will handle everything. I trusted that. I trusted the law. I brought you both out here. To this nothing. I trusted him. I am so stupid. You are not stupid, Will said quietly. You are decent. You thought he was, too. It does not matter what I am, Lenora cried. He has us. He will find a reason. He will. He already has one. Josephine sobbed. The cabin went silent. Lenora turned, her eyes wide. What did you say? Josephine was trembling, tears streaming down her face, her flirtatious mask completely gone, leaving only a terrified 19-year-old. He, when we were in his office, when he was laughing at us, you were yelling at him. You were demanding the papers. And Clara was just standing by the door. I was so angry. Josephine! What did you do? Lenora's voice was a dead whisper. He had a drawer open. There was money, a stack of it. While he was looking at you, I took it. Lenora looked as if she had been struck. You stole from him? I took it, Josephine cried. I did not know what else to do. He was taking everything from us. Our home, our future. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted us to have something. It was not much, maybe $50. I hid it in my skirt. Oh, God, Lenora, I am so sorry. He is not calling me a thief for nothing. I am one. Lenora stared at her, speechless. All the fight went out of her. She looked at Will. He has a warrant. He said it. It is a real warrant. Will nodded, grimly. He told me, this changes it. He is not just chasing you now. He has the law on his side. He can come here with the marshal, and it will all be legal. Then we must run. Lenora said, her voice hollow. No. Will's voice was quiet, but it cut through the panic. I told you, I know this man. The sisters looked at him. You just said you had a cabin here, Lenora said. I do, but I did not always. When I first came to this territory, I needed work. I am good with a horse, good with a rope, good with a gun. Delver, he was hiring men like me, not for ranching, for securing his assets. You worked for him? Lenora's voice was filled with a new, cold horror. I did, Will said, his face hard. For about 2 months, I thought it was just moving squatters off his land, riding the property lines, but then he had me go with 2 other men to a tenant family. A small farm, their crop had failed. They could not pay his lease. It was November, colder than this. He stared at the stove, but he was seeing something else. He told us to get them out. The man, he begged, said his wife was sick. They had a child, Delver's man, the foreman. He just laughed. He told me to start carrying their things out. And did you? Lenora whispered. I did. I carried out their table, their chairs, their bed. The woman was just lying on the mattress on the frozen ground, not moving. The man he was broken. And then the foreman, he lit a torch. He said, "The house is forfeit." He set the cabin on fire. Clara made a small sound, her hand flying to her mouth. I had not known, Will continued, his voice thick. I thought it was just eviction, but it was an ending. The man tried to stop them. The foreman hit him with the butt of his rifle. I saw the child, just standing there, watching his home burn. What did you do? Josephine asked. I told the foreman to stop. He told me to mind my business. He raised his rifle at me. Will stopped. He looked at his hands. I am no stranger to violence. Ma'am, I left that night. I took my pay and I rode as far as I could. I ended up here, in this basin, where no one else wanted to be. Where I did not have to see men like that. He looked up, his eyes meeting Lenora's. I carry the fact that I worked for him, that I stood by while that house burned. I am not going to stand by again. So what? Lenora said, her voice shaking. You will be our hero. You will fight them all. You will die, and they will take us anyway. That is what you are offering. Guilt. You are offering us your guilt? I'm offering you my cabin, Will said flatly. And my gun. It is all I have. You can run, and they will catch you. Or you can stay, and we will make a stand. A legal stand, if we can. A physical one, if we must. The choice is yours. Night fell. The cabin was a tinderbox of unspoken fears. No one ate. Will took his blanket and went outside. He could not be in that small, airless space with them. He sat with his back to the cabin wall, his rifle across his lap, watching the moonlit prairie. He did not hear her until she was right beside him. You should not be out here, Lenora said. It is cold. I am better out here. You are a fool, she said, pulling her thin shawl tighter. She did not sit. She stood over him, a pale ghost in the moonlight. You are a fool, playing at being a savior. You think that one grand gesture makes up for that? Will looked up at her. I am not trying to make up for anything. I am just tired of running. I ran from Delver once. I am not running again. This is not your fight, she hissed, her voice trembling with a fury that was close to tears. This is my failure, my mistake for trusting, my sister's mistake for stealing. It is ours. You have no part in this. You will just get yourself killed for 3 women you do not even know. I know you, Will said, his voice quiet. I know you are trying to hold your family together. I know your sister is so scared she cannot see straight. And I know the other one she has not spoken in God knows how long. I know enough. You know nothing. Lenora's voice cracked. You do not know what it is to have everything, and then to have nothing. To be looked at as if you are worthless. Just baggage. Just a woman with no land, no money. Her anger suddenly collapsed, leaving a raw, open vulnerability. Will stood up, alarmed by the sudden shift. When our land was when we first found out about the debts, she whispered, staring out at the dark prairie. I was engaged. To a good man. Or so I thought. A rancher from the next county. We were to be married in the spring. Will said nothing. He just listened. When my father died, she continued, and the lawyer, the one who worked for Delver, told us the land was gone, my fiancé came to see me. He was so polite. He said he was sorry for my loss. He said he wished me well. And then he said that his own prospects were not secure, that he could not, in good conscience, take on a wife who had no dowry, who had nothing. She let out a dry, short sob. He left, just left. He did not want me. He wanted the land I came with. When that was gone, I was worthless. She wrapped her arms around herself. So do not stand there and tell me you know me. You are just like him. You are helping because you see weakness. You see something you can need. You do not want us. You need to fix this to make yourself feel clean. You are wrong, Will said, his voice raw. You think I do not know what that is, to be looked at as worthless? She turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. What would you know about it? I know, he said, taking a step closer. The air was frigid between them. I have been a hired hand my whole life. I am the man who mends the fence, who breaks the horse, who brings in the cattle. I am the one who gets paid and told to move on. I am useful. I am needed. But nobody. In my entire life, nobody has ever once chosen me. Not for myself. I am just the help. Their eyes locked. In the moonlight, he saw the deep, aching loneliness in her that matched his own. She saw the shame he carried, and he saw the shame she bore. They were two sides of the same worn, thin coin. He did not know who moved first. It might have been him, it might have been her. But suddenly, his hands were on her arms, and her hands were on his chest, and he was leaning in. The kiss was not soft. It was hesitant, then desperate. It tasted of cold air, dust, and a shared, unbearable grief. It was a collision. It was two people, starved for warmth, finding a spark in the absolute dark. It was the last thing either of them expected, and it was over as quickly as it began. Lenora tore herself away, stumbling back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a new kind of shame. No, she whispered, horrified. I cannot, we cannot. She turned and fled back into the cabin, barring the door behind her, leaving Will alone in the moonlight, his heart pounding a painful, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He stayed out for another hour, his mind reeling, the feeling of her lips still burning on his. When he finally went to the door, he gave the quiet knock. The bar was lifted, and he slipped inside. The cabin was dark. He could hear Josephine's soft snores. He could see Lenora's shape in the bunk, her back to the room, perfectly, rigidly still. He lay down on his blanket by the door, but he did not sleep. He was floating in that gray space between waking and dreaming when he felt it, a change in the air. He opened his eyes. Clara was standing over him, in the faint, dying red glow from the stove. She looked like an apparition. He did not move, feigning sleep. She watched him for a long time. Then, moving with a silence that was almost supernatural, she bent down. She placed something on his saddlebag, which he was using as a pillow. Her fingers brushed the leather, and then she was gone, slipping back into her bedroll without a sound. He waited until he was sure she was settled. He reached over, his hand finding the object. It was a piece of wood, a smoothed piece of pine, likely from the kindling box. He angled it toward the red glow of the stove. She had carved into it. She had used her little knife, scratching a picture into the surface. It was a drawing, simple, almost like a child's. On the left, a figure with long hair. On the right, a figure with curly hair. In the middle, a smaller figure, the three sisters. And in the center of them all, holding hands with each of them, was a tall man, wearing a hat. Will stared at the carving until the embers in the stove turned to black ash. He held in his hand the one thing he had never had, a picture of a family, a picture of a home. He woke to a sharp, indrawn breath. The cabin was gray with early morning light. Josephine was awake. She was staring at Will, and at the piece of wood he still held in his hand. He saw the look on her face, a complex, ugly knot of jealousy, fear, and a desperate, childish anger. Before Will could move or speak, she lunged forward. She snatched the carving from his hand. "Josephine," Will said, sitting up. "It is stupid," she hissed, her voice thick with sleep and spite. "It is just a stupid drawing. She does not know anything." She turned to the stove. Lenora was stirring, sitting up, rubbing her eyes. "Josie, what is it?" "It is nothing," Josephine cried, and she pulled open the firebox. A few small embers still glowed. She threw the piece of wood onto them. "No!" Will shouted. "Moving!" He was too late. The dry pine caught instantly. A small, bright flame licked up the side, blackening the image of the tall man. Josephine froze. Her hand was still in the air, her face pale. She watched the flame, her eyes wide, her mouth open. She had not meant for it to be so fast. The anger on her face curdled into instant, horrified regret. She looked at Will, her expression breaking. Will, wearing his work gloves, plunged his hand into the firebox and snatched the wood back out, beating the flame against his thigh. He was left holding a charred, smoking piece of pine. The edges were gone. The faces of the sisters were blurred with soot, but the central image, the four of them, holding hands, it was still there, burned, but there. Lenora was staring at Josephine. Clara was sitting bolt upright in the bunk, her eyes fixed on the ruined carving in Will's hand. Her face was a mask of utter, silent desolation. The morning broke in the cabin like a splinter of glass. Clara sat up first. She looked at the charred piece of pine Will was still holding, his knuckles white. She looked at Josephine, who was crumpled by the stove, her face blotchy with tears and soot. She looked at Lenora, whose face was a mask of cold, hard judgment. Slowly, Clara slid off the bunk. She walked to Will. Her movements were stiff, her bad foot dragging slightly. She held out her hand. He looked at her, his eyes hollow, and placed the burnt carving into her palm. She did not cry. She did not look at Josephine. She took the carving back to the bunk, wrapped it in her only spare piece of cloth, and tucked it deep inside her valise. Then she lay down, her back to the room. I did not mean," Josephine's voice was a choked whisper. "Be quiet," Lenora said. Her voice was not loud, but it was sharp enough to cut. "Just be quiet. Get up. Get the water." Josephine flinched, but she obeyed, scrambling to her feet, her shame radiating from her like a fever. She grabbed the bucket and fled the cabin, her sobs breaking loose the moment the door shut. Will and Lenora were left alone in the heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Clara's stiff, controlled breathing from the bunk. Lenora would not look at him. She began to pack the few supplies they had from town, her hands moving with a jerky, angry precision. "He will come," Will said, his voice flat. "I know. You should not." He gestured to Josephine, who was now weeping by the well. "She is young." Lenora stopped. She turned, her eyes black. "She is 19, Mr. Madsen. She is old enough to steal, and she is old enough to be cruel, and you and I, we are old enough to know that a single spark can burn everything down." She went back to her work, and the conversation was over. A day passed. It was a day of awful silence. Will worked outside, splitting wood with a grim rhythm, his axe falling like a judge's gavel. He was not just splitting wood. He was building a barricade. Josephine did her chores, her eyes red and downcast, avoiding everyone. Lenora cooked, her mouth a thin, hard line. Clara did not leave the bunk. The attack came on the second day, near noon. The sky was a pale, indifferent blue. Will saw the dust first. 2 riders, coming not from the road, but cutting across the basin. They were not in a hurry. They were confident. "Inside," he said, his voice low. He did not shout. Lenora, who was hanging a blanket to air, snatched it and ran inside. "Josephine! Clara! Get down!" Will moved to the side of the cabin, his rifle in his hand. He was protected by the corner of the sod wall. He waited. The men rode up to the cabin, stopping 20 yards out. They were the men from the saloon, the ones in derby hats. "Madsen," the first one called out. He was a heavy man with a lazy voice. "We are here on behalf of Judge Delver. He has a warrant for the girl, Josephine, and for the money she stole." Will said nothing. He just watched them from the shadow of the wall. "He also wants the other two," the man continued, patting his horse's neck. "For their own protection, you understand. The judge is a forgiving man. He does not want to see them fall into bad company." He grinned, showing brown teeth. "You are not the marshal," Will said, his voice carrying, "We are agents of the court." The man said, "Now, send them out, all three, or we are coming in. The judge said you were uncooperative. He said we might have to be uncooperative too." The second man, a thinner, rodent-faced man, uncoiled his lariat. He was not planning to use it on a horse. "You are on my land," Will said. "I am telling you to leave it. This is not your land, Cowboy." The heavy man laughed. "This is Judge Delver's territory. You are just borrowing it." He pulled his pistol. "Last time, send them out." The man turned his horse, as if to move toward the door. The other man, the thin one, dismounted, holding his rope. "I will flush him," he said. "That is far enough," Will warned. The heavy man on the horse raised his pistol, not at Will, but at the cabin's single, glass-paned window. "I will make the first invitation," he sneered. He never fired. Will's rifle cracked, the sound echoing flat across the basin. It was a single, definitive shot. The heavy man screamed, his pistol flying from his hand as he grabbed his leg. Just above the knee. Blood burst between his fingers, a bright, shocking red. The thin man froze, his rope half raised. He looked at his partner, who was swaying in the saddle, and then at the corner of the cabin, where Will now stood, exposed, already working the lever to chamber another round. Will's rifle was aimed at the thin man's chest. "You!" the man stammered, his bravado gone. You shot him." "I did," Will said, his voice cold. "I aim for his leg. I will not aim for yours. Get him on his horse and ride. He is bleeding. Then you had best ride fast. Put your gun belt on the ground." Slowly, the man unbuckled his belt and let it fall into the dust. "Now get him, and give Judge Delver a message. Tell him this is my line. He crosses it again. I will not wound. I will bury." The thin man, shaking, scrambled to help his partner, who was moaning, half fainting in the saddle. He grabbed the reins of his partner's horse and, without looking back, galloped away, dragging the horse and its wounded rider with him. Will watched them until they were just a speck of dust. He leaned against the cabin wall, his breath coming out in a long, shaky sigh. He felt sick. The cabin door opened. Lenora stood there, her face as pale as bleached bone. Josephine was hiding behind her. Clara was in the doorway, her carving knife in her hand. They will be back," Lenora whispered. "Yes," Will said. He reloaded the rifle. With the marshal this time, or with a mob. The shooting changed everything. It cut the last thread connecting them to the outside world. Will was now a marked man. He had shot an agent of the court. Delver would twist the story. He would say Will was protecting a thief, that he was holding the women against their will. The rumors they had feared were now a certainty. They were sealed inside the cabin. The four of them, a small island of outlaws. The tension, already high, became unbearable. They were trapped not just by Delver, but by each other. "They will hang you," Josephine said 2 nights later. She was pacing the small floor, her hands twisting in her dress. "They will hang you, and it will be my fault, because I stole. We have to go. We have to run. Tonight." "And where do we run?" Lenora countered. She was sitting at the table, patching one of Will's shirts, her stitches small and violent. "We have no wagon. We have 1 horse. Clara can barely walk. We would not make it 5 miles before they caught us. And running proves we are guilty. Staying proves we are fools," Josephine cried. "We are waiting here to die. I will not be taken back there," "Lenora, I will not go to his jail." "My fight is not with his jail," Lenora said, her voice low and intense. "It is with him. He stole our land. He stole our father's name. I will not run from him. I will find a way to Laramie. I will find a federal marshal. I will fight for justice." "Justice?" Josephine laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "There is no justice. There is just Will's gun, and that is not enough." Clara, who had been listening from the bunk, slammed her hand against the wall. They both stopped. She looked at Josephine, her eyes filled with a weary contempt. She mimed running, her fingers flying. Then she mimed being caught, her hands grabbing her own arms. Then she mimed falling, her body slumping. She shook her head. "No." Then she looked at Lenora. She pointed to the ground. "Here." She balled her fist and held it over her heart. "Stay here." Then she closed her eyes and tilted her head, a gesture of finality. "Die here." She would rather die in this cabin than be hunted on the prairie again. The argument was over, but the divide remained. Lenora wanted to fight. Josephine wanted to flee. Clara wanted to stop moving. Will watched them. He saw the way Josephine looked at him, a mix of fear and a strange, desperate gratitude. He saw the way Lenora avoided looking at him, the memory of their kiss a cold wall between them. And he saw Clara, watching them all, her silence a heavy, knowing weight. He was the source of it, his presence. The rumors Delver was spinning, harboring thieves and teases, were true, in a way. Not the facts, but the feeling. The cabin was too small. The situation was too raw. He was a man, and they were 3 women, and the air was thick with things no one would name: fear, guilt, and a desperate, aching need. He had to give them dignity. He had to give them space. The next morning, he took his axe and his horse and rode up into the small canyon behind the cabin. He began felling trees. He worked for 3 days, from sunup to sundown, with a frantic, punishing energy. He did not talk. He just worked. He dragged the logs back, one by one. On the 4th day, he began to build. Josephine saw it first, from the window. What is he doing?" Lenora came to look. About 30 yards from the main cabin, Will was laying a foundation of rocks. He was starting to build a second cabin. It was small, just 1 room, but it was separate. It was another building. It stirred a confusing, complicated mess of feelings. To Josephine, it was a rejection. He was building a wall. He was pushing them away, separating himself from her, the thief, the source of the trouble. To Clara, it was a promise. He was not running. He was not leaving. He was taking wood and earth and stone, and he was building. He was making their world stronger. She began to leave a cup of water for him on a stump when he was not looking. To Lenora, it was the most complicated of all. It was an act of profound and painful respect. He was doing what her fiancé had not. He was not running from the scandal. He was facing it and building them a shelter for their dignity. He was giving them a space, a home that was separate from him. The man. It was a deeply proper gesture, and it felt, after their kiss, like a gentle, heartbreaking refusal. A storm broke that night. It was not the dry fury of the wind. It was a cold, driving October rain. The temperature plummeted. The basin turned to a sea of mud. Will was not finished. The new cabin had walls, but no roof. He could not, in good conscience, sleep in the main cabin, not with the tension as it was. He had given them the main cabin entirely. He took his bedroll to the lean-to, to sleep with the horse and the mare. The sisters were inside, listening to the rain lash against the walls. The fire roared, but the cabin felt cold. "He is out there," Josephine whispered, staring at the door. "In the barn. It is freezing." "It was his choice," Lenora said, her voice tight. She was staring into the fire. "It was not a choice," Josephine said. We drove him out, with our fighting, our mess." Josephine had been finding Will's whiskey. It was a bottle he kept for snakebite, hidden in the grain sack. She had been taking small sips for days, just to dull the sharp edges of her fear. But tonight, she had taken more. The whiskey, mixed with her guilt and the cold, driving rain, was making her reckless. He kissed you, did not he? Josephine said suddenly. Lenora went still. What? I saw you. The night before the shooting. I saw you outside. He kissed you. You do not know what you saw, Lenora said, her voice deadly. I saw that, Josephine insisted. And now he is building another house. Because you rejected him. He kissed you, and you ran. She was half drunk, and her words were slurring, but they were sharp. He hates me because I burned Clara's wood. And he wants you, and you will not have him. And we are all going to die here. Go to sleep, Josephine, Lenora said. No, I will not. Josephine suddenly stood, her eyes wild. He is out there cold, because of us, because of me. Before Lenora could stop her, Josephine unbarred the door and ran out into the storm. Josephine, get back here, you fool! Josephine stumbled through the mud, the icy rain soaking her thin dress in seconds. She was sobbing, a raw, desperate sound that was lost in the wind. She half fell into the lean-to. Will was on his feet in an instant, his gun in his hand. Who is? He saw her, drenched, trembling, her hair plastered to her face. Josephine, my God, you are soaked. Go back inside. I cannot. She shivered, her teeth chattering. You are drunk, he said, his voice hard. But he grabbed a horse blanket and threw it around her. No, yes, I do not know, she cried. She was not just cold, she was undone. You hate me. You are building that house to get away from me. I am not, he said, trying to push her back toward the door of the lean-to. I am building it to protect you. Now go back. You will catch your death. I do not care, she shrieked, and she threw herself against him. I do not want to die, not in jail, not worthless. She clung to him, her small, cold hands grabbing his shirt. You kissed her. But I am the one who needs, please. Will, do not hate me, please. She was so full of grief and whiskey and a terrible, lonely desire to be wanted, just once, by someone good. She was not trying to be seductive. She was a drowning girl. She put her face up to his and kissed him. It was not a kiss. It was a desperate, fierce, clumsy collision. It tasted of rain and whiskey and salt. Will's first instinct was to recoil. No, he grunted, his hands on her shoulders, pushing her back. Josephine, stop. You are not. This is wrong. He was a man of control. He was a man of honor. And she was a girl, terrified, drunk, and in his care. But as he pushed her away, she clung tighter, sobbing his name, as if he were the only solid thing in the world. Please just do not push me away. He was so lonely. He had been pushed away by Lenora. He was standing on the edge of a grave he had dug for himself. He was cold and tired, and he had not felt a woman's touch, not a kind one. In ever. His resistance, the wall he had built, it faltered. Her desperation found an echo in his own. His hands, which had been pushing her away, gentled. They held her. He was not a savior. He was just a man, and he was just as broken as she was. He kissed her back. It was not love. It was not even lust. It was a shared, hopeless collapse. Two people, in a storm, hiding from the end of the world. It was a moment of pure, human failure, and a desperate animal need to not be alone. The next morning, the storm had passed. The world was bright, cold, and wet. Lenora woke first. She looked at the bunks. Josephine's was empty. Clara was asleep. Lenora's heart stopped. She sat up, listening. She heard a soft, shuddering breath. By the hearth, on the floor, was a huddled shape. It was Josephine. She was asleep, her clothes still damp, her face pale and sick. She was wrapped in Will's heavy wool blanket, the one he kept by the door, the one he had taken with him to the barn. Lenora stared, her mind, sharp and practical, assembled the facts. The fight, the whiskey on Josephine's breath last night, her running into the storm, and now this, asleep, on the floor, in his blanket. Her face, which had been hard with anger, simply fell. All the fight, all the anger, all the hope drained out of it, leaving something gray and empty. She had lost her sister, her family, their dignity, all of it. The door creaked open. Will stood there. He looked haggard. He had not slept. He looked at Lenora, and then at the floor where Josephine lay. He saw the blanket. His expression was one of deep, profound self-loathing. Lenora just looked at him. Her eyes were dead. She said nothing. She turned, put on her shawl, and walked out of the cabin, past him, as if he were not even there. Clara woke to the silence. She saw Josephine on the floor. She saw Will in the doorway, his face a mask of shame. She saw Lenora walking stiffly toward the new, half-built cabin. Clara's eyes darted between the three of them. She understood. She understood the kiss with Lenora. She understood Josephine's desperation. And she understood this. Quietly. So quietly. No one noticed. Clara slipped out of the cabin. It was hours later, in the cold light of the afternoon, that they realized she was gone. Josephine had woken, sick and weeping. Her shame so profound she could not speak. Lenora was cold, silent, hammering nails into the new cabin, working beside Will as if he were a stranger. "Where is Clara?" Josephine's voice was a small, terrified squeak. They searched. The panic was real, a sharp, acidic fear. Delver. The river. They found her by the river, a half-mile downstream. She was sitting on a flat rock, staring at the fast-moving water. She was holding a small piece of wood and her knife. She was carving a whistle. "Clara," Will said, his voice cracking with relief. He stumbled down the bank. "Clara, you scared us." She did not look at him. She kept carving, shaving thin strips of wood. "Clara," Lenora said, her voice softer, her own grief forgotten in the panic. "Come back to the cabin. It is cold." Clara stopped carving. She looked up, not at Lenora, not at Josephine, who was hovering on the bank, weeping. She looked at Will. Her eyes were not angry. They were not hurt. They were just empty. She had been on this rock before. She knew this feeling. She held up her hands. She pointed to Will. Then she pointed to Josephine, cowering on the bank. She made a small, sharp gesture. "Choose. Take." Then she pointed to herself, and she made a small, pushing away gesture. "Me, no." She held his gaze, and her fingers moved. "You. Choose. Her. Two." The two shattered him. It was not just about Josephine. It was about Lenora. It was about everyone. It was the question from the carving. Come back as an accusation. You are like all the others. You will choose one, and you will discard the rest. Will broke. He did not sob. He collapsed. He sank to his knees on the muddy riverbank. He buried his face in his hands. The violence, the fear, the shame of the night before, and now this gentle, final judgment from the only one who had truly seen him. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick. He looked up, his eyes raw. "No, I did not. I am not choosing." He looked at the muddy water, confessing. "I do not know how. I am not trying to replace anyone. I am not trying to choose one over the other." He looked at her, his soul stripped bare. I am trying not to lose you. I am trying not to lose all of you. I am trying to hold on. And I am failing." He put his head down, his shoulders shaking. Clara watched him. She saw Lenora, frozen, watching him. She saw Josephine, watching him. She looked down at the half-finished whistle in her hand, and, for the first time since her childhood, a single, hot tear traced a clean path through the dirt on her cheek. They returned from the river in a silence more profound than any storm. Will's confession, raw and broken on the muddy bank, had not fixed anything. It had simply lanced the wound. Clara had taken his hand, her small, calloused fingers gripping his, and pulled him to his feet. She had not let go until they reached the cabin door. Lenora and Josephine walked behind them, separate, lost in their own worlds of cold shame. For 2 days, a new, fragile quiet settled. It was not peace, it was exhaustion. Will worked on the new cabin. His hammer blows the only sound in the basin. He was building a roof, a task he focused on with a grim, punishing intensity. He was trying to build a solution, because he had no words left. The sisters stayed inside. They cooked, they mended, they spoke in low, necessary murmurs. Pass the salt. The water is low. Clara sat by the window, carving, always carving. The shame of that night in the barn and the shame of the fight at the river hung between them all. A visible, ugly fog. Will slept in the half-finished cabin on a pile of wood shavings, preferring the cold and the solitude. On the third morning, they came. It was not the thunder of a mob. It was the deliberate, official sound of 2 horses, walking. Will was on the new roof, laying sod. He saw them. Giles Delver, clean-shaven, wearing his black town coat, looking as if he were inspecting property. And beside him, the town marshal. Will dropped his hammer and slid to the ground, his rifle in his hand before his feet even settled. He stood in the space between the 2 cabins. "Mr. Madsen," Delver called, his voice pleasant. He stopped his horse 30 yards away. The marshal, a weathered man named Elias Brody, stopped with him. Brody looked at the ground, his face miserable. "Delver," Will said. "That is Judge Delver," the man corrected, smiling. He held up a piece of paper. "I have come bearing the full weight of the law. I have here a warrant for the arrest of one Josephine Miller, for the theft of $65 from my office. I also have warrants for Lenora and Clara Miller, as material witnesses and accomplices to the crime." The cabin door opened. The 3 sisters stood there, pale, watching. "You are not taking them," Will said. Delver sighed, a theatrical sound. "Marshal Brody, I am ordering you to execute these lawful warrants. This man," he pointed at Will, "is obstructing justice. He is harboring a known fugitive. He has already discharged his firearm against agents of my court. He is dangerous." Marshal Brody licked his lips. He looked at Will, his eyes pleading. "Will, son, the paper is legal. It has the county seal. I have to ask you to stand down. I just want to talk to the young ladies." "You can talk from there," Will said, his rifle held low, but ready. "Those warrants are forged. You know it. He knows it. He just wants them silenced." "Oh, that is a very serious accusation," Delver said smoothly. "One a judge does not take kindly to." "Will," the marshal said, his voice dropping, "do not make this a fight. I do not want this, but I am sworn. If you refuse, I have to take you in." "Then you had best try," Will said. The standoff stretched. The wind kicked up dust around the horses' hooves. The marshal looked at the warrant. He looked at Will's steady hands and the dark bore of the rifle. He looked at the 3 women in the doorway, who looked less like criminals and more like refugees. "Judge," the marshal said, not looking at Delver. "He is on his own property, and he is not aiming the rifle yet. I will not be the first to draw. Not for this." You refuse?" Delver's voice lost its smoothness, turning sharp. "I am uneasy," Brody said, the word heavy. "I will not start a gunfight over a $60 theft when there are other matters. I will ride back to town. Judge, I will consult the circuit judge when he passes through next month." "Next month?" Delver was livid. "This is cowardice. This is dereliction." "This is as far as I go today," the marshal said, his voice flat. He turned his horse. "Will, you are on a razor's edge. Do not fall." He rode away, leaving Delver alone. Delver stared at Will, his face a mask of cold, white fury. "You think you have won? You have done nothing. You have one gutless marshal on your side. I am the law. I will come back, Madsen. And when I do, I will not bring him. I will bring men who are not uneasy. I will have a posse, and we will burn you out." He wheeled his horse and galloped after the marshal, his dignity forgotten in his rage. Will lowered the rifle. He did not feel like he had won. He felt like a man who had just been told the date of his own execution. He walked back to the half-finished cabin, picked up his hammer, and went back to work. He needed to hit something. The confrontations began that afternoon. The threat was no longer distant. It was here. It had a face, and it had a deadline. Josephine came to him first. She found him at the new cabin, his hands raw from splitting shakes for the roof. She stood there, twisting the hem of her dress. "You faced him down," she whispered. "For me, even after the other night, you protected me." Will did not stop his work. He set a piece of wood and hit the fro, splitting it. "Thwack! I was not protecting you," he said, his voice rough. "Thwack! I was protecting the cabin." She flinched, the words hitting her like a slap. "Oh, I see." He stopped. He sighed, the anger leaving him, replaced by a deep weariness. He turned to her. His answer was raw, uncertain. "Josephine, that is not what I meant. That night it was a mistake. It should not have happened. I was lost, and you were drunk on fear. It was not real. It felt real," she said, her voice tiny. "No," he said, his voice softer. "It was just two people falling. That is all." "So what am I to you?" she demanded, her voice rising with a desperate need. "Am I just a mistake? A thief you are stuck with?" He looked at her, really looked at her. The practiced charm, the brittle flirtatiousness. It was all armor for the terrified child underneath. "No," he said, his voice honest. You are the one who is most afraid. You are the one who acts first and thinks later. You are like a prairie fire. You burn. You are so scared of being left. You will burn down the whole world just to make someone look at you." He shook his head. "I am not stuck with you. I am just trying to keep you from burning yourself up. That is all." She stared at him, tears welling. It was not the answer she wanted. It was not an absolution or a declaration. It was just the truth. She turned and ran back to the main cabin. Clara came next, just before dusk. Will was sitting on the porch of the main cabin, cleaning his rifle, the pieces laid out on a cloth. He had moved back in. The new cabin could wait. They were safer, all of them, under one roof. She sat on the step below him. She said nothing for a long time. Then she held out her hands. She had been carving again. He stopped his work. "What is it?" She signed. She pointed to him. "You said trying not to lose." He nodded, slowly. "I remember." But she signed. She pointed to Lenora, inside, then to Josephine, who was lying on her bunk, her face to the wall. Then she pointed to herself. "What are we?" She repeated Josephine's question, but her meaning was different. It was not, "What am I to you?" It was, "What is this?" Will laid the rifle down. He thought for a long time. How to be honest? "I do not know," he said, his voice low. "It is new. I look at Josephine and I see a girl who needs a father, a protector, someone to tell her she is worth something before she does something foolish. I look at Lenora." He paused. "And I see a wife. I see a woman, a partner, someone who is stronger than I am, someone who knows what is right. She is like the iron spine of a book. She holds all the pages together." Clara watched him, her eyes unblinking. "And me," she signed, her hand touching her chest. Will looked at her. His raw, uncertain answer came from a place he had not known existed. When I look at you, Clara, I just feel still. You do not want anything from me. You are not scared. You are not angry. You just see. You are the anchor. You are the one who knows the truth." She considered this. She signed. "Anchor, holds the boat, but cannot move." "No," Will said, his voice thick. "It is the only thing that keeps the rest of us from being smashed on the rocks. You are the heart of it." She looked down at her hands. Her truth was simpler and sadder. She signed. "I am the one who cannot speak." She left him on the porch and went inside. Lenora found him last. It was full dark. The cabin was silent. He was not on the porch. He was standing by the empty horse corral, just staring into the blackness of the basin. "You should not be out here," she said, her voice quiet, all the anger gone. "He could have men watching." "Let them watch," Will said. "I'm tired of hiding." She stood beside him, pulling her shawl tight. "You lied to him, to the marshal. You said we were innocent." "You are," he said. "No, we are not. Josephine stole from him. I assaulted you. That night I kissed you, and you slept with my sister. We are all guilty of something." "So are they," Will said. "His guilty is just bigger than ours." She was quiet for a moment. "You told Josephine she was a responsibility. You told Clara she was the heart. What am I, Will? The one you are scared of? The iron spine? Am I just the one who cooks the food and reminds you of your conscience?" He turned to her. In the starlight, he could see the tracks of tears on her face. She had been weeping, silently. "No," he said, his voice raw. You are the one I want." The words hung in the cold air. She closed her eyes. Do not say that. Not now. Not after Josephine." "It is the truth," he said, his voice breaking with an honesty that cost him everything. "It is the one thing I know. I am a mess. Lenora, I have failed you. I failed her. I am just a hired hand. But when I kissed you, that was the first true thing I have done in 10 years. And it terrified me, because you are everything. You are a home. You are a fire. You are the kind of woman a man like me has no right to even look at. And Josephine," she whispered. "Josephine she was a storm. I was just trying to hold on. It was pity, and it was weakness. And I will carry that shame forever. But it was not this." What is this then?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I do not know," he said, and it was the most honest answer of all. "I do not know what this us is. I just know that I will not let him take it." He turned and walked back to the cabin, leaving her standing alone by the corral. The next day, the sisters talked. The private confessions had broken the ice. Now, the flood came. Will was outside, pointedly giving them the cabin. "We have to leave," Josephine said. She was sitting on the floor, her voice hollow. "We have to run. He loves you, Lenora. He pities me. He respects Clara. We are breaking him. He is going to die for us." "We are not leaving," Lenora said, her voice quiet but firm. She had found her strength again. "He is right. Running is what Delver wants. The only way is through him. We will go to Laramie. All of us. We will go to the federal courthouse." "And say what?" Josephine cried. "That I'm a thief. They will put me in prison. Lenora, I will not. I cannot. I am terrified of small spaces. I will die in a cell." "Then I will say you stole it," Lenora said. "I will say I forced you. Do not be a fool. No one would believe you." While they argued, Clara finished her new carving. She had been working on it for days. It was a flat piece of cottonwood, smoothed and pale. She held it up. It was not the simple, naive drawing of the first one. This was more intricate. In the center sat a small, still figure. Clara, on her left, a figure with sharp, proud features. Lenora, on her right, one with wild, curly hair, Josephine. And standing behind them, his hands on their shoulders, a tall man in a hat. Will. But the defining feature was the hair. From Clara's head, a single, long braid. It wove from her to Lenora, to Josephine, and then back to Will, connecting all four of them in an endless, intricate loop. One family, one braid. Josephine looked at it, and her terror finally broke, replaced by a deep, shuddering anger. "No!" she screamed, snatching the carving from Clara's hand. "It is a lie! It is a pretty lie! There is no one braid! There is him and you!" She pointed at Lenora. "And there is him and me! And there is him and her! It is a tangled, ugly mess! And you want to go to Laramie and fight? You want me to go to jail? "It is the only way," Lenora shouted back, her own control snapping. "It is the only way to be clean. Can you not see? He is giving us a chance to have our dignity back." "Dignity?" Josephine laughed. A terrible, broken sound. "I have no dignity. I lay with him in the barn. I have nothing. And you are just angry because he did not choose you first." "How dare you?" Lenora's voice was a low, shaking hiss. You selfish, weak, you are a child. And you are a spinster," Josephine shrieked, the words she had been holding back for years. "You are cold, and you are hard, and no one, not your fiancé, not him, no one will ever really want you." Lenora slapped her. It was not a tap. It was a hard, ringing crack of palm against cheek. Josephine stared, stunned, her hand to her face. Then she launched herself at Lenora, sobbing, pulling at her hair. I hate you. You want to get us all killed. I am trying to save us," Lenora cried, tears streaming down her own face as she tried to push Josephine off. It was an awful, raw, primal explosion of all the fear and grief and jealousy that had been festering for weeks. And then Clara stood up. She walked into the middle of the tangle of flailing arms and weeping. She pulled them apart, and then, with all her strength, she slapped Lenora. Lenora froze, her mouth open in shock. Clara turned, and she slapped Josephine. The cabin fell into a shocking, absolute silence, broken only by the sound of two women gasping. Clara stood between them, her entire body shaking, her face a mask of terrible, righteous fury. Her hands flew, her signs sharp, violent, and clear. "Stop! Stop! Both of you! Look!" She pointed at Lenora. You think you're strong? You're a coward, afraid, to love." She pointed at Josephine. You think you are weak? You are a coward, afraid, to live." She beat her fist against her own chest. "You are breaking us, not him. You." The truth of it, delivered in that furious silence, shattered them. Lenora looked at Josephine's bleeding lip. Josephine looked at the red mark on Lenora's cheek. The fight was gone. The anger was gone. Lenora was the first to collapse, sinking to her knees, her face in her hands, her sobs dry and agonizing. Josephine just crumpled, falling to the floor, her weeping a thin, exhausted wail. Clara stood over them, trembling, and then she, too, slid to the floor. The three of them, a heap of broken, sobbing women. Will had heard it all from the porch. He had heard the screams. He had heard the terrible, sharp sounds of the slaps. And then he heard the unified, grieving sobs. He was helpless. He could not go in. It was not his fight. He backed away, walking to the edge of the small yard, staring up at the vast, indifferent Wyoming sky, the stars just beginning to prick the dusk. "What have I done?" he whispered to the sky. He felt a coldness in his chest that had nothing to do with the wind. I wanted a home, a place." A hard, painful knot rose in his throat. "I have never," he confessed, his voice choking, "never in my life wanted anything more than this, a roof, a fire, people who know my name." He looked at the cabin, the sound of their weeping a knife in his heart. "And I have never," he finished, "been more afraid of having it. I am poisoning them. I am ruining them." That night, the cold was a living thing. The fire in the stove was low. Will lay on his bedroll by the door, his blanket pulled up to his chin. He was not asleep. He was just waiting. For the end. He heard a movement. He opened his eyes. It was Clara. She was dragging her blanket. She did not lie on her own bunk. She came to his bedroll. She lay down, her back to him, pressing herself against his side. She was trembling with cold. Will went rigid. He did not move. He did not breathe. An hour passed. He heard another sound. Josephine. She stood over them, a ghost in the dim firelight. She looked at Clara, pressed against Will. She looked at her empty bunk. She dragged her own blanket over. She lay down on Will's other side, curling into a small, tight ball. her back to him. He was pinned between them. Two small, cold bodies, seeking nothing but heat. He could feel the light, shuddering breaths of both of them. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. He heard one last movement. Lenora. She stood at the foot of his bedroll. She looked at her sisters, flanking this man. She saw them not as rivals, but as children, lost, cold children, huddling against the only fire they had. She did not go back to her bunk. She brought her blanket. She did not lie down. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, facing them. She sat watch. Then, in the dark, Clara, still pressed against Will, reached her small, cold hand out, over his chest, Joseph changing her position. Josephine, on his other side, turned. She saw the hand. She reached out her own and took it, their two hands clasped, resting on his sternum. Will felt the light pressure. He felt the connection. He heard Lenora sigh, a long, slow release of breath. She reached forward. She did not take their hands. She simply placed her own hand over theirs, covering their joined grip, her palm resting over their knuckles, on his chest. Three hands, joined as one, resting over his heart. Will Madsen closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He lay awake all night, feeling the weight of them, the warmth of them. His heart hammered under their hands, a frantic, trapped bird, terrified, and, for the first time in his life, caged. Home. The morning after, the cabin was transformed. The night had not brought shame. It had brought a strange, fragile peace. When Will woke, he was still on his back, and their three hands were still in sleep, clasped over his heart. He had not moved, terrified that the slightest motion would break the spell. He waited until the sun was fully risen, one by one. They woke. Lenora first. She removed her hand, her face unreadable in the gray light. But she did not move away. Josephine woke with a small, confused sound, and pulled her hand back as if burned, her face flushing with a new, softer shame. Clara was the last. She opened her eyes, looked at her hand, and then looked at Will. She did not smile, but her eyes were clear. She took her hand away and sat up. The spell was broken, but the air was different. "We go to Laramie," Lenora announced, her voice firm as she started the fire. It was not a question. "We go today. We will file charges against Delver at the federal courthouse." Will just nodded. "I will get the horses." There was no argument, not from Josephine, who just looked pale and sick, not from Clara, who just packed their meager valise. They were a single unit, moving with a grim, new purpose. The journey was a trial. It was late autumn, and the wind had teeth. Will only had Bess, his mare, and a smaller, scrappy pack horse. He put Josephine, who was already pale and trembling, on Bess. He loaded their few supplies on the pack horse and put Clara on top of the mound of blankets. Then he and Lenora walked, Bess's reins in his hand. It was a harsh, cold ride. The wind clawed at them, stealing their breath and their warmth. They did not talk. The only sound was the plodding of hooves, Will's steady boots in the dust, and the snap of the wind. By the second day, Josephine was ill. Her shivering was no longer just from cold. A fever had taken hold, born of fear, exposure, and the whiskey she had stolen. She swayed in the saddle, her head lolling, held steady only by Lenora, who now walked beside her, one hand on her back. Clara, perched on the pack horse, saw it all. She saw the land, empty and hostile. She saw her sister, fading. She saw Will, his face set like granite, his eyes scanning the horizon, his guilt a heavy coat on his shoulders. She stopped eating. She refused the hardtack Will offered. She shook her head at the dried beef. It was a silent, desperate protest. If the world was a place that made her sister sick, she would not take any part of it. When they finally saw the sprawling, muddy streets of Laramie, they were all half ghosts. Will was gaunt, his feet bleeding in his boots. Lenora was a pillar of ice, her face chapped raw but her spine rigid. Josephine was barely conscious. Will found a room for them in a boarding house at the poor end of town. A single, cold room with one lumpy bed and a pitcher of brown water. He paid for 2 nights with the last of his money. "You stay here," he told Lenora. "Bar the door. I will get a doctor for her. Then we will see the law." "No," Lenora said. "The law first. She is sick, Lenora. She will be sicker if we fail. We go now. All of us. They need to see what he did." She was right. So they went. They half-carried Josephine to the federal courthouse, a proud, new brick building that smelled of fresh plaster and indifference. A bored clerk made them wait for an hour on a hard bench. Finally, they were shown into a judge's chambers. The room was dark, paneled with wood. Giles Delver was already there. He was standing by the fireplace, warming his soft hands, looking clean, fed, and confident. He smiled when he saw them, a small, pitying twist of his lips. "Judge," Delver said to the man behind the desk, "these are the persons I spoke of, the Miller sisters, and the man who is keeping them, a Mr. Madsen." The judge was an old man with a tired face and eyes that had seen too much human misery to care about one more story. He looked at their dusty, torn clothes, at Josephine, barely able to stand, at Clara, her eyes wide and feral, and at Will, his hand resting on the pistol on his hip. "Ma'am," the judge said to Lenora, "Mr. Delver informs me you have been squatting on his property. He has a warrant for your sister for theft. He says this man shot at his agents. Is this true?" "He is lying." Lenora's voice was clear, ringing in the quiet room. He forged our father's deed. He stole our land. He sent men to chase us off, to silence us. He is a criminal." The judge sighed. He looked at Delver. "Giles." "Judge," Delver said, his voice oozing reason and regret. "It is a sad story. Their father, God rest him, died in considerable debt. I did my best to liquidate the assets to cover it. The land was sold at public auction. These poor women, they could not accept it. Grief does terrible things. They became hysterical. The girl," he nodded at Josephine, "stole $65 from my desk. A fact. And this man, Madsen, he is a known agitator, a hired gun. I fear he is taking advantage of their grief. Holding them. For what purpose?" He let the insinuation hang in the air. "He has a forged warrant," Will said, his voice a low growl. "The warrant is from my court, Mr. Madsen," the judge in Sweetwater Crossing said. "It is legal. This man," he said to the Laramie judge, "is a menace. I simply want to retrieve my property, the stolen money, and see these women are placed in proper care." The Laramie judge looked at the papers Delver provided. He looked at the ragged, desperate family before him. He chose the easier path. I see no proof of forgery here," the judge said, his voice flat. "I see a legal warrant from another jurisdiction. This is a complicated matter. I will delay any ruling. Pending further investigation, this court is adjourned." It was not a delay. It was a dismissal. You cannot," Lenora stammered. "Good day, ma'am," the judge said, not looking at her. Delver smiled. "I will be waiting in Sweetwater Crossing. Mr. Madsen," he said quietly as they passed. "Do not try to run." They stumbled back out into the cold street. The defeat a physical, sickening weight. They had failed. The law, the real law, had turned them away. Josephine was weeping, her fever making her delirious. "He won. It is over." "It is not over," Will said, his voice a rasp. He helped Lenora get her sisters back to the boarding house. "Stay here. Lock the door. I need to get food and medicine." He went to the mercantile. His shoulders bowed. He bought laudanum for Josephine's fever. He bought a loaf of bread, a brick of cheese. He had almost no money left. He needed one more thing. He went to the saloon. It was loud, crowded, and full of the kind of men he had tried his whole life to avoid. He went to the bar. "A bottle of your cheapest whiskey," he said to the bartender, "and a glass of water." He was waiting for his bottle when he heard the whispers. Delver's men, the ones he had not shot, had been in town. The story was already here. That is him, the one from the basin. Got 3 of 'em, they say, all to himself, as Will paid, a large, drunk man, a trapper in greasy furs, stepped in front of him, blocking his way. The man was huge, a wall of muscle and sour smell. "Well, looky here," the trapper boomed, his voice slurring. "It's the king of the basin. Heard you got yourself a regular harem out there, Cowboy." Will tried to step around him. "Excuse me." The man laughed, shoving Will back. "In a hurry? Gotta get back to the ladies?" He leered at the crowd. "Heard you got one for each hand, and in one for, well, when you get tired of the other 2. The saloon roared with laughter. Will looked at the man's leering, stupid face. He saw Delver. He saw the judge. He saw the cold, empty prairie. He saw Josephine, sick with fever. He saw Clara, starving herself. He saw Lenora, her spine finally bowing under the weight of their defeat. His vision went red. He did not say a word. He did not warn him. He dropped the bread and the cheese. He shifted his weight, and with all the force of his shame, his rage, and his fear, he punched the man in the throat. It was not a saloon brawl. It was an execution. The man made a horrible gagging sound, his eyes wide with shock, and collapsed, clutching his neck, unable to breathe. The saloon went dead silent. Will stood over him, his hand, his knuckle, screaming in pain. He had broken it. The town sheriff, a different man from Brody, a hard man with a thick mustache, was there in an instant. "Madsen, you are under arrest." Will did not resist. He just nodded, his chest heaving. "He was drunk. I am not. Drunk or not," the sheriff said, pulling Will's hands behind his back. "You cannot be half-killing men in my town. You are going to spend the night in my cell. Cool off. We'll just let them take him." He had failed. Again. Alone. In the rented room at the edge of town. The sisters heard the story. The boarding house owner, a thin, disapproving woman, told them, "Your man, he is in jail, brawling. Broke a man's throat, they say." The door was locked. The humiliation was complete. Josephine was lying on the bed, her breath a shallow, hot rasp. He hit that man," she whispered, her eyes bright with fever. "For us, for what that man called us." She started to sob, a weak, terrible sound. They will hang him. It is all my fault. It is all my fault." "No, Josie," Lenora said. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, bathing her sister's head with a cool, damp rag. Her voice was not angry. It was not sharp. It was just empty. "It is not your fault. It is Delver's. It is this whole rotten world." They sat in the dark for a long time. The only sound was Josephine's weeping and the distant, drunken shouts from the street. What do we do now, Lenora?" Josephine whispered. "He is gone. They will come for us." "They will not." Lenora said, "We are in Laramie. Delver has no power here. Not real power." "But we have nothing," Josephine cried. "We have no money. Our protector is in jail. We are just what that man said." "No," Lenora said, her voice fierce. "We are not." She stopped, her hand frozen on Josephine's forehead. "We are not." Josephine, in her fever, asked a question that changed the room. What do you want, Lenora? Truly, if Delver was gone, if we were safe, what would you want?" Lenora was silent. She looked at her own chapped, rough hands. I want to not be ashamed," she said, her voice so low Josephine had to strain to hear. "I want to walk down a street. I wanted to build something, a house, a life, something that is mine. I want respect. Not as a woman to be married, not as an orphan to be pitied. Just respect and a purpose." Josephine looked over at the small chair in the corner. Clara was sitting there, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes wide, watching them in the lamplight. "What about you, Clara?" Josephine whispered. What do you want?" Clara had not eaten in 2 days. She was weak, but her eyes were sharp. She slowly unfolded her hands. She signed, her fingers trembling slightly. Safe. She touched the thin, warped door. No, run, no, men, yelling. Then she touched her throat. Voice. She shook her head. Not just sound. She touched her heart. Here. She touched her temple. Here. She wanted to be heard. She wanted what she knew to matter. And then she looked at both of them, huddled on the bed. Her hands made a small, encompassing circle. Family. Josephine let out a long, shuddering sigh. Family. She closed her eyes. I want to be loved. She said it, the secret, shameful truth. I know it sounds foolish. But I do not mean like a toy. Something a man uses and then throws away. Like I threw myself at will. She shuddered, a full-body tremor. I want someone to see me. The real me. The one who is so scared. And I want them to stay. I want to be a partner, not a mistake. Lenora put the rag down. She took Josephine's hand. She reached out her other hand to Clara. Clara slid off the chair and onto the bed. The three of them, in the cold, dark, rented room, held hands. They were not one. They were three different, broken pieces. Three different, clear, desperate wants. And for the first time, they were not fighting each other. The next morning, the sheriff let Will out. Your hand looks mean, he grunted, shoving Will's gun belt at him. Get some arnica on it, and get out of my town. Madsen, you are trouble. Will stepped out onto the boardwalk. The morning was bright, cold, and hateful. His hand was a swollen, purple mass of agony. His heart was a lead weight. He had failed. He had gotten himself arrested. He had brawled like a common drunk. He had made them a public spectacle. He had ruined them. He looked up, expecting to have to go find them. To apologize. They were there. They were standing on the boardwalk across the street, waiting. They were not cowering. They were not weeping. Their dresses were torn, caked in dust and mud. Josephine was leaning on Lenora, her face pale and sick, but she was standing. Clara's eyes were not feral, they were clear. Lenora's spine was a rod of steel. They were just waiting. For him. He started to cross the muddy street, his heart aching. He did not know what to say. I'm sorry. He stopped. As he got closer, Lenora held out her right arm. Josephine, weak as she was, linked her arm with Lenora's. Lenora held out her left arm. Clara stepped up and linked hers. The three of them, a solid, unbroken line, arms linked, their eyes were shining, not with tears, but with a new, fierce, terrible light. They had found something in that room. Will just stood in front of them, his broken hand at his side, his shame exposed. He had no words. Lenora just nodded. It is time to go home. Will. The ride back was silent. But it was a different silence. It was not empty, it was full. Will walked, leading Bess. Josephine rode, her head resting on Lenora's shoulder. Who walked beside her? Clara, on the pack horse, was awake. She was alert. As they rode, Will saw Josephine, her eyes closed, reach out her free hand. She did not grope for it. She just held it out, and Lenora's hand found it. They held hands, the sick sister and the strong, and for the first time since Will had met her, Clara, riding behind them, began to hum, a low, soft, old tune, a lullaby from a life before. They reached the basin by nightfall. The cabin was cold, dark, and exactly as they had left it. It felt small. Will started the fire. The women sat, exhausted. Will watched them. He saw them huddled together, Josephine in the middle, Lenora and Clara on either side. He saw their united front. He heard Clara still humming. As she got water, he saw the way they moved. They did not need him. They had each other. He was the scandal. He was the man who brawled in saloons. He was the one Delver could point to. He was the shame. Without him, they were just three sisters, orphans. The law might, one day, pity them. But with him, they were what that man had said. He was the poison. It was the only honorable thing left to do. He picked up his saddlebag. He checked his rifle. "Will?" Lenora's voice was sharp. She had seen the movement. "What are you doing?" "I am leaving," he said, his voice thick, his back to them. The humming stopped. "Delver, he is right. About me. I am the problem. As long as I am here, you are what they called you. Without me, you are just three sisters. The law, they might listen. But with me, I have made it worse. I have ruined you." He turned, his face ravaged with guilt, his broken hand held against his chest. "I will go. I will draw Delver's men off. I will ride south. You can claim the cabin. It is yours." He moved to the door. "No." It was Josephine's voice, weak but strong. "Stop." It was Lenora's. He turned. They were all standing. Clara was in the middle, her hands fisted at her sides. Lenora stepped forward. She was trembling. You think you get to decide that?" she whispered, her voice shaking with a new, cold anger. "You think, after Laramie, after everything, you get to just ride away and be noble? Lenora, you are a fool." "Will Madsen," she said, You are just as broken as we are. You think we are ashamed? We talked. In that room. We are done being ashamed." She took a deep breath. Will could see the terror in her. This was the last, greatest risk of her life. You told me I was the one you wanted. You told Clara she was the heart. You told Josephine, you told her you were trying to keep her safe. She looked back at her sisters. They both nodded, urging her on. She looked back at Will. You are trying to choose one thing to be, the protector, the man who leaves. But you are not one thing. Will, and we are not one thing. She stepped closer. Her voice was barely audible. We, this is a family. You, Clara, Josephine, me. It is all of us, or it is none of us. She was trembling so hard she could barely stand. So, you choose, but you do not get to choose between us. Her eyes were shining, her face raw with a terrible, beautiful hope. You choose all three? She asked. You choose us? Will stared at her raw, open, terrified heart. He looked at Josephine, who was weeping silently, her hand over her mouth. He looked at Clara, whose hands were clasped at her chest, her entire body rigid with waiting. He understood. The choice was not which one. The choice was all. The choice was family. He dropped his saddlebag. It hit the floor with a soft, final thud, slowly, as if his knees could no longer hold the weight of his entire life. Will Madsen dropped to one knee. He was not praying. He was surrendering. He looked at Lenora, the iron spine. He reached out and took her hand. It was cold. He brought it to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Slow, reverent. "I choose you, Lenora," he whispered. He kept hold of her hand and turned to Josephine. "The prairie fire." He reached for her hand. She gave it to him, her fingers wet with tears. He kissed her knuckles. "I choose you, Josephine." He kept hold of both their hands. A man holding two anchors. He looked at Clara. The heart. She was already holding her hand out, her small, scarred palm open. He took it. He kissed her knuckles. "I choose you, Clara." He stayed there, on one knee, in the center of their small, cold cabin. He held the hands of all three sisters. He looked up, his own eyes finally overflowing. "I choose all of you. I choose us." The choice had been made. The world, however, had not yet been informed. Will's declaration, kneeling on the cabin floor, had bound the four of them into a new shape, but it was a shape that had no name in polite society. They had chosen truth over scandal, but the scandal had not gone away. Whispers followed them. When Will and Lenora rode to Sweetwater Crossing for supplies, they rode together now. Always. The street fell silent. Faces turned. Curtains were pulled aside. The mercantile owner, a man who had once shared coffee with Will, now counted his change with clipped, precise movements, his eyes never meeting theirs. "Mr. Madsen," he said, his voice flat, his gaze on the counter. "Ma'am." It was a dismissal. The true poison, however, came from the pulpit. The preacher, a thin, fiery man named Reverend Ford, had found a new, dark focus for his sermons. He did not use their names. He did not have to. "There is a sickness in this basin," he thundered, his voice cracking with righteous fury. "A den of unspeakable arrangement, a man who takes not one, but 3 abandoned women to his bed. It is a stain upon this good, God-fearing land, and the Lord, in his righteousness, will burn it out. He will burn it out with fire and with flood." The schoolmistress, a young, pale woman from Boston, followed his lead. When Lenora, desperate for some normalcy, had inquired about borrowing a book of sums for Clara, the woman had recoiled. I cannot," she stammered, her face flushing crimson. "The school board, we cannot condone that, as we will not teach any child from that place." The word hung in the air. Place, not a home, not a cabin, just a place. They were lepers, isolated by a wall of whispers and moral judgment. But the prairie was different from the town. The town was built on rules and appearances. The prairie was built on survival. Their nearest neighbors, ranchers too isolated to care for town gossip, saw things with different eyes. One morning, they found a burlap sack on their porch. Inside were potatoes, onions, and a slab of smoked bacon. There was no note. A few days later, a woman they barely knew, a homesteader's wife named Mrs. Peterson, passed them on the road. She was driving a small buckboard. Instead of pulling away, she stopped. She just looked at Lenora, woman to woman. She saw the exhaustion, the defiance, and the fear. "Mrs." Peterson just nodded. It was a small, quiet gesture, an acknowledgement, not of their sin, but of their struggle. Then, a rancher named Ebbets, a man as weathered as the land itself, rode up to the cabin. Will met him in the yard, his hand near his gun. "Madsen," Ebbets grunted. He nodded at the half-finished, abandoned second cabin. "Heard you had wind damage." "I am managing," Will said. Ebbets spat tobacco. "That roof is laid wrong. It will leak. I got an hour." He dismounted. "I will show you how to set the shakes proper." He worked with Will for 2 hours. They did not speak of Delver. They did not speak of the sisters, who watched from the window. They spoke of cattle and water and the coming winter. When they were done, Ebbets mounted up. "You shoot a man," Ebbets said, looking at the horizon. "You best have a good reason, but Delver ain't a good reason. He is a necessary one." He rode off, leaving Will with a mended roof and the first crack of hope. The town might have cast them out, but the prairie, the hard, true country, was undecided. That hope was short-lived. Giles Delver was a man who could not tolerate defiance. He had been humiliated by Will, by the sisters, and, most of all, by Marshal Brody's refusal. His power in Sweetwater Crossing was built on a foundation of absolute, unquestioned fear. Will's continued existence was a crack in that foundation. He did not come with the law. He came with fire. They came at dusk, a line of 20 horsemen silhouetted against the blood-red sky. They were not agents. They were a mob, men from the saloon, men who owed Delver money, men who had been whipped into a frenzy by Reverend Ford's words. They carried torches, and Will could see the dark, ugly shadow of a rope coiled on a saddle. "Inside," Will said, his voice deadly calm. "Bar the door. Get the rifles." The sisters moved. No panic, no tears. Lenora checked the load on a Winchester. Josephine grabbed a heavy skillet. Clara took her post at the small window, her carving knife in her hand. Will stood on the porch, his own rifle held at his waist. "That is far enough! Delver!" he yelled. Delver pulled his horse up. Just out of rifle range, the mob fanned out, a closing crescent of fire and hate. "It is over! Madsen!" Delver's voice was triumphant. "The good people of this county have spoken. We are here to cleanse this basin of your filth. We are here for the thief, and we are here for you." A man lit a jug and threw it. It smashed against the sod wall, and oily flames licked up the side. "Now, Delver!" Will shouted, raising his rifle. But a new sound cut the air. Not a gunshot, a whistle, sharp and clear. From the road. 3 men rode hard. In the lead was Marshal Brody, his face grim. Beside him were 2 strangers, grim-faced deputies from Laramie. "Stand down!" Brody roared, his voice carrying an authority Will had never heard him use. "Stand down, in the name of the Federal Court of Wyoming." The mob hesitated, torches held high. Delver's face contorted in rage. "What is this, Brody? You are protecting them?" "No," Brody said, pulling his horse up between Will and the mob. He unholstered his pistol. "I am not here for him. I am here for you." The marshal looked at Delver, and his voice was cold. "Giles Delver, I have a warrant for your arrest, for fraud, land theft, and conspiracy." Delver laughed. "That is absurd. You have no proof." "We do now," Brody said. A 4th rider emerged from the darkness. It was a woman, shrouded in a black shawl. She was small, and she looked terrified, but she sat tall in her saddle. It was Mrs. Gable, a widow from the edge of town. "He did it to me, too." The widow's voice trembled, but it carried. "When my Henry died, he came with papers. He said there were debts that the ranch was forfeit." "She is a liar," Delver hissed. "Her deed, the one he filed," the 2nd deputy called out, "was a forgery. We have the federal land grant from Cheyenne. It looks like yours was, too, ma'am." He nodded to Lenora, who was now standing in the doorway. The mob was silent. The men looked at Delver. They looked at the widow. They looked at each other. This was not about sin. This was about theft. And every man there held a deed that had, at one time or another, passed through Giles Delver's office. The anger that had been aimed at Will now turned, a slow, cold, heavy suspicion, onto the judge. He told me my taxes were high," one man murmured. "Said my water rights were in dispute," another whispered. The mob was not a mob anymore. It was just a group of cold, worried men. They began to back their horses away, their torches suddenly looking foolish. "Arrest him," Brody said. Delver reached for his gun. He never cleared the leather. Will's rifle butt was in his gut before he could blink, knocking the wind out of him. He toppled from his horse, gasping. The Laramie deputies were on him in an instant, binding his soft hands. "It is over," Will said. He watched them drag the judge away. A sputtering, cursing, pathetic man, justice once stirred, moved with a slow, grinding patience. They traveled to Laramie again. This time, they were not refugees. They were witnesses. They stayed in a clean hotel, the bill paid by the federal marshal. They testified. Lenora, her voice clear and strong, laid out the facts. Mrs. Gable testified. 3 other families, emboldened by Delver's arrest, came forward, their own stories of forged deeds and sudden debts tumbling out. The trial was short. The evidence was overwhelming. Delver's network, built on paper and fear, collapsed. He was found guilty. The judge, the same one who had dismissed them, looked at the sisters. "The court," he said, his voice heavy with a new respect, "voids the illegal sale of your father's property. The land is restored to you, effective immediately, with our apologies." They walked out into the sunlight, free. Their father's ranch, the one near Laramie, was theirs. They were, once again, women of property, but the basin had become their home. They returned to the small sod cabin, the land restored to them, but the choice of where to live still unmade. Winter passed in a quiet, watchful peace. The tension was gone, replaced by a strange, new domesticity. Will slept by the fire. The sisters shared the bunks. They were a family, but a family still figuring out its own shape. Spring came, not as a gentle thaw, but as a violent accusation. The preacher's words proved prophetic. A massive thunderstorm, the kind that gathers for days, broke over the plains. The sky turned a sickly green black, and the rain came down not as drops, but as solid, roaring sheets. The dry creek bed that ran near the cabin, the one where Will had found their wagon, became a monster. It was a boiling, churning river of brown water, Mud and debris. The basin, true to its name, began to fill. Clara, who had always found a strange solace by the water, had walked too close. They heard a shout, not from her, but from Josephine. "Clara, the bank! It is gone!" Will and Lenora ran out. The bank of the arroyo had collapsed, and Clara was in the water. She was not swimming. She was being tumbled, a small, dark shape in the raging flood, tangled in the roots of a ripped-out cottonwood. Will did not think. He ran down the new, muddy shoreline, his eyes fixed on her. "I am coming! Clara!" He plunged in. The water was colder than ice, a physical, battering blow. It stole his breath. The current was a living thing, a giant, angry hand that grabbed him, pulling him under, smashing him against rocks he could not see. He fought his way to the surface, gasping, and saw her, just 10 feet away. He reached her, grabbing a fistful of her dress. She was not fighting. She was limp, her eyes wide with a strange, calm terror. He tried to pull her free, but the roots had her, tangled around her legs. "Hold on!" he roared. He went under, fighting the branches, the current tearing at him. He felt his lungs burning. He pushed, he tore, he ripped at the roots, his hands raw. Finally, she was free. He got his arm around her chest, but the current had them. They were swept downstream. He kicked, fighting for the bank, but he was losing. His body was numb. He was so cold. He managed to get one foot on a submerged rock, and he pushed, throwing them, bodily, out of the main channel and onto a new, shallow mud flat. They lay there, gasping, half-drowned. Lenora and Josephine were there in an instant, dragging them the rest of the way to solid, flooded ground. Clara was coughing, vomiting water, but she was alive. Will just lay in the mud. He tried to stand. She is," he whispered, and he collapsed. He had a vague memory of being carried, of the cabin, of the fire, then nothing. He burned. The cold of the river had settled deep in his lungs, and it had turned to fire. He had lung fever. For 3 days, he was not in the cabin. He was back in the water. He was in the fire with the Tennant family. He was in the snow, lost. He surfaced once, in the dead of night. The cabin was still. A single lamp burned. Lenora was beside him, her face pale and exhausted, wringing out a cloth. He grabbed her wrist. His hand was weak, but his grip was iron. "Lenora!" he rasped, his voice a dry crackle. He saw the fear in her eyes. Not just for him, for all of it, the scandal, the neighbors, the future. "This," he whispered, pulling her hand closer. This life, the whispers, the town. It does not matter." He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that shook his whole body. He held her gaze. "I would rather die," he said, each word an effort. "I would rather die with this scandal than live without this truth." Her face broke. The iron spine finally bent. She did not weep. She just lowered her head, her forehead resting on their joined hands. "Do not die. Will," she whispered. "Please do not choose to leave us now." She held his hand. She did not let go. She sat there, a silent, watchful guardian, bathing his face, forcing broth between his lips, holding his hand until, as the sky turned a pale, watery gray, the fever broke. He was sweating, and he was sleeping. He was alive. Life returned to the basin. The flood receded, leaving behind a new, rich layer of dark earth. The land was washed clean. Will recovered, his strength returning slowly, a new, deep quiet in his bones. They had a choice to make. Their Laramie ranch was waiting. It was large, respectable. But this cabin, this basin, this was home. As they were rebuilding the small section of sod wall that the flood had damaged, Josephine found Lenora alone by the water barrel. She was not the flirtatious, frightened girl anymore. She was quiet. She was centered. "Lenora," she said, her hands clasped at her waist. I have to tell you something." Lenora turned, drying her hands. "What is it? Josie? I am with child." Lenora froze. The towel slipped from her hands into the mud. What did you say?" "I am pregnant," Josephine said, her voice small, but not ashamed. It was a fact. She looked at Lenora, her eyes clear. "It is Will's. From that night. In the storm." Lenora stared at her. Her face went through 1,000 changes. Shock, disbelief, a flash of the old, hot anger, and then something else. She looked at her sister, truly looked at her. Josephine was not bragging. She was not terrified. She was just stating the truth. Lenora bent down, picked up the towel, and then, to Josephine's shock, she began to weep. She did not sob. Tears just streamed down her face. "Oh, Josie," she whispered. It was not an accusation. It was a lament, for the simplicity they had lost, for the terrible, beautiful complication that had found them. A baby." Josephine wept, too, and Lenora pulled her into her arms, holding her, the two of them crying together, not for the shame, but for the sheer, unbridled life of it all. Clara had been in the cabin. She had heard. She walked out the door, past her weeping sisters. She stepped out into the yard. A soft, clean spring rain had begun to fall. She looked at Lenora, holding Josephine. She looked at Will, who was mending the corral, his back to them, unaware. She tilted her head back, letting the fresh, cool drops hit her face. She closed her eyes. A small, slow smile spread across her face. A baby, a family, a new life, born not of law or vows, but of a storm and failure and a desperate need. It was the most true thing of all. She spread her arms wide and, in the middle of the muddy yard, in the gentle, cleansing rain, Clara began to dance, a slow, turning, silent circle of pure, uncontained joy. They did not move to Laramie. They sold that land. They used the money to buy the basin and all the land around it. This was their place. The cabin Will had started, the one meant for separation. They tore it down. They used the logs, and they cut new ones. They built all 4 of them, together. It was a single, long cabin, built on the highest, safest part of the land. It had one long, sturdy roof. In the middle was a great room, with a fireplace large enough to heat them all, and one long, rough-hewn table, big enough for a feast. And branching off that room, they built 3 small, private spaces. A room for Lenora, a room for Josephine, a room for Clara. Will's bed was in the great room, by the fire, at the heart of the house. It was a home built not for the world, but for their truth. The seasons turned. The house was finished. Autumn came again, crisp and clear. The final scene is not one of drama. It is one of peace. A fire burns in the new hearth. Outside, the last light of the day paints the prairie in shades of orange and purple. A new fence is rising at the edge of the property, its posts strong, its lines true. Inside, Will is sitting in a heavy wooden chair, his feet propped up. His hand, healed but scarred, rests on the arm. He is reading aloud, his voice a low, steady rumble, filling the warm room. It is a book of poems. He is not alone. They are curled around him, a tangle of blankets and limbs and quiet breathing. Lenora, his iron spine, leans against his shoulder, her eyes closed, her hand resting on his arm. Josephine, his prairie fire, is on the floor, her head resting on his knee. Her belly is swollen and round, full with the promise of winter. Clara, his heart, sits at his feet, her head leaning against Josephine's shoulder, her hand resting absently on Will's boot. They are at peace. They are not hiding. They are home. Will pauses in his reading. He looks down at the 3 women, his family, and a slow, quiet smile touches his lips. He looks back at the fire, its light dancing on their faces. Outside, in the last sliver of twilight, a single hawk wheels free, high above the basin, catching the wind. Its cry a sharp, clear echo of what it means to be, finally and completely, unbound. Thank you for listening to our story. Please let us know where you are listening from in the comments to connect with your fellow travelers. And be sure to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.